Assalamu alaikum friends. Today my topic of discussion is the critical appreciation of the painter by John Ashbery. So let's start. The Painter is an elegant, seriously thoughtful and philosophical but a bit enigmatic poem by John Ashbery. As we know that most of Ashbery's poems revolve around the idea of life, death, soul and art. This poem too revolves around such ideas but in a unique, light-hearted and allegorical style. The poem is a typical example of John Ashbery's obscurity, which is deceptively simple. What is the purpose of art? How does the conscience of an artist move about? What are the various pressures on an artist, and above all, how an artist can touch the heights of satisfaction in his art? These are the questions which make the crux of this poem. The magical quality of this poem is very captivating and it reveals that there is always psychological complexity and soul stirring analysis in all Ashbery's work, which capture the attention of modern day reader. In short, present poem is a typical specimen of Ashbery's great skill. The surface story of the poem is very simple, having hardly any idea of complexity or allegorical thoughts. We find a painter, perhaps a poet himself, sitting behind the sea and some huge buildings behind. The painter is thinking about his next piece of art and decides to portray the sea as the subject of his painting. Somehow or the other, he could not find the inspiration that is needed to paint such a complex and puzzling painting. Soon, leaving his meditation as an artist, he wished like an innocent child. He is subject to rush up the sand and seizing a brush plaster its own portrait on the canvas. Naturally, the wish is too childish to be fulfilled and he remains sitting without painting anything. The people watching him busy in his work give him their own views about painting. They advise him to paint something easier, common, and the way the tradition has been going on. Thus, their views is select for a portrait something less angry and large. However, the painter finds it tiresome to convince the people of his own conception of art, which is that nature, not art, might usurp the canvas. To please the people around, he decided to change the subject and attempted to paint his wife. However, he was thoroughly dissatisfied with his effort. After some efforts to ignore this call of painting going in him, he returns to the wild urge of burning in him, that is, to paint sea. Now, too much of concentration and dilemma about the choice of painting had destroyed him mentally as well as emotionally. He lost his energy and vitality even to lift up the brush, and the other artists from the buildings around made fun of him. Some ridiculed his impossible idea of painting sea, the other rebuked him for self love, and others declared it a self portrait. In this dilemma of to be or not to be, he is not able to put a single stroke on the canvas and it is left perfectly white. Suddenly, a huge voice is raised by the crowd, agitated at the unique and unacceptable idea. They threw him, his canvas, and the brush into the swelling waves of the sea. Thus, his desire remained a futile dream for him and couldn't be actualized. This is the story around which the whole texture of the poem is woven. On the surface reading, it seems a simple tale of a painter who wanted to paint something but could not. However, a thorough critical analysis would suggest that it is not all. In fact, the poem captures in its very essence Ashbery's conception of an artist, the purpose of art, and the very method would be adopted by an artist. In this regard, the present poem can be compared to Robert Browning's famous art poem Fra Lippo Lippi. In that poem, also Browning highlights the attitude of the so-called authorities and traditionalists who would like that their views in art, whether it be painting or poetry, should be followed. The idea of beauty in painting is not a new one and depends upon the intellectual that perceives it. Thus, every genuine artist has his particular way of looking at the beauties of God and appreciating them. However, Any near reader may be deceived in considering it a poem related to the theme of art. The poem can be called a contrast on three levels: traditional approach and the modern approach, authority and message, personal will and social conscience. The painter in this poem is conscious artist and knows that the real art lies in concealing art. An imitation of the worldly objects in a blind way may not suit his purpose. For him, the copy of the objects is not the honesty which is demanded by the conscience of an artist. To find the truth inherent in the outer surface of beauty may lead someone to go in the abstract, neglecting the concrete. Thus, an innovation in the existing tradition may be taken as blasphemy by the mediocre mind, as happened with the painter of this poem. This very aspect of the poem can be called autobiographical one as well. John Ashbery too was harshly criticized for his style of writing. Even his rank as a poet was challenged by few. The poet thus has attempted to propagate that a genuine and true artist is the one who challenges the existing norms and finds his own of identification. In short, if we visualize the poem in this context, then the C stands for originality of an artist, and the people in the buildings are the traditional artists who would challenge every new move. If the poem is taken in more general context, then the painter is a living soul whose conscience is not dead by the popular and yet baseless concepts of society. The huge buildings are the popular views of the society, and the sea is a symbol of an ideal. However, society too in its execution is orthodox and never allows its norms to be trespassed. This a price which an individual has to pay for being a member of social setup. In short, personal will has to be sacrificed to suffer the greater pressure of the society. Otherwise, we should be thrown violently into the sea, a sea of troubles. The painter can also be viewed as an indirect attack on the authorities and the so called companions of humanity who will implement their rules as absolute solution of every problem. The poem was written in 1956, which was the worst period in terms of the freedom granted to the writers. The painter, by painting the sea, wants to use this basic right of the freedom, but the authorities would like to listen the truth which they want. In the end, it can be said the painter is a highly symbolic, allegorical, and deep philosophical poem by John Ashbery. The credit goes to him for giving deep thoughts in such a simple and easy language and style.